My name is Dr. Lars Krutack, and I'm a tattoo anthropologist. And for more than 20 years, I've been studying the history of tattooing across indigenous cultures to ancient cultures, and also through the studies of mummies and ancient objects of art. I am here at the Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow to talk about the exhibition Tattoo, which is opening soon. And this is an exhibition that began in 2013 at the Musée de Quai Branly in Paris, and it's traveled around the world, educating the globe about the significance of tattoo history and culture, and how it's evolved over time into a modern art form. What's unique about every venue is that each museum or institution brings in its own select objects from its permanent collection to add to the core collection that came from the Quai Branly. So in that sense, every single iteration, every venue of this exhibition is unique unto itself, because there's amazing pieces of art, objects that we'll talk about in a few moments that are unique to those institutions, and they will not be seen anywhere else. However, at each venue, there are also contemporary cylinders. We have like a tattooed silicone cylinder over here by Hank Schiffmacher. And at every venue, one or more will be commissioned, and then one will travel to the next venue. So for instance, here in Moscow, there are 2 volumes that have recently traveled from the last 2 shows, one in Los Angeles that ran in 2018 through 2019, and then, of course, most recently in Taiwan, where the exhibition traveled to get here in Moscow. So you can also see those tattooed cylinders by contemporary tattoo artists. This part of the exhibition fascinates me because it sort of brings me to the beginnings of my own tattooing research. 22 years ago, I was a graduate student in Alaska, and for my master's thesis, I worked with the St. Lawrence Island Yupik people, whose relations, their neighbors, live on the Chukotka Peninsula of Siberia. And actually, here's an elder from Chukotka that was photographed by my friend Dmitry Babakin in summer of 2018. And there's still a few women left that have these amazing skin-stitched facial tattoos. I was working with these elders on St. Lawrence Island, which is only 50 miles away, in 1995, 1996, but the last 2 passed away in 2004. Also, what intrigues me are these engravings from early Russian America. Because when I was a graduate student, I'd seen reproductions of these in a particular exhibition catalog called Crossroads of Continents, which brought together Russian and American scholars speaking about trade and interaction and culture in Bering Strait. But this is the first time I've actually seen the original, the real ones in person. And it's just a great moment for me to actually come full circle, I'd say. And this is also amazing. I never thought I'd actually see the original. But this is the earliest representation of probably a maritime Chukchi or a Siberian Yupik tattooed woman from the 1790s, 1780s. But it's fairly accurate, except for the rendition of a pearl necklace and the addition of her pearl bracelet. The tattoos are definitely accurate. And when I was working on St. Lawrence Island, in the mid-90s, there was one woman left that had the full arm tattooing. She was 94 years old at that time, Anna Oktakayak. And I think the reason why she was the most fully tattooed woman on the island is because her older sister was still alive. She was 97, and she was the last tattoo artist on the island. But we know that this tradition, at least in Chukotka, goes back over 2,000 years, because the ancient ancestors of the St. Lawrence Island and Siberian Yupik people left behind these small carvings in ivory that have the facial and body tattoos inscribed into them. And they have not really changed over those 2,000 years of continuous population in those regions. You could see the same tattoos on a woman in 1995 as you could, in some instances, on these ancient pieces of prehistoric ivory art. So some unique pieces of art that you will not see anywhere else are actually these 3 drawings of tattoo motifs from coastal Papua New Guinea, most likely the Motu tribe. I've actually conducted research there myself with the last generation of tattoo bearers. And the collector, Nicholas McLuhan Maclay, was also tattooed during his time in the 19th century when he was in Papua New Guinea, and he collected a set of tattooing instruments that it's very possible were used in the creation of the small tattoo that he brought back as a souvenir. And of course, as we move into actually the entryway, the oldest object in the exhibition is from ancient Egypt. Yeah, this is an extremely rare and unique artifact from the New Kingdom of Egypt. It's a cosmetic spoon in the shape of a swimming woman. The materials are ebony and ivory, and what she's holding is a lotus blossom, and that would be the receptacle for the cosmetics that this high-status woman would have been holding. This must have been a very expensive item in that age, which is about 3,400 years ago. But what's fascinating about this piece is that there's at least evidence of some tattooing on her thighs, on the underside and the front of her thighs, the goddess or deity Bes, which is a patron deity of childbirth, of protection, also of musicians. And that tattoo of Bes actually continued on into the Roman period of Egypt. And there are also some markings on her backside. It looks like a belt just above her buttocks. And we're not sure if that's a belt or if those are also tattoos, but they also sort of mimic the shape of this lotus blossom. They look like a row of blossoms, of lotus blossoms on her back. But the history of tattooing is ancient. If you read this introductory panel, this is actually the room that you come into when you enter the exhibition. We know that tattooing is at least 5,300 years old, and the oldest evidence comes from Europe. Let's see the Iceman who was uncovered melting out of a glacier in 1991. He's 5,300 years old, and he has 61 linear tattoos across his body. And what's really interesting about those is that 85% of them line up with classical acupuncture points to relieve bodily aches and pains. And we know that his body was racked by arthritis. So it seems like some of the oldest tattoos in the world were medicinal. And the second oldest tattoos were only uncovered a few years ago, and they come from pre-dynastic Egypt. And these are 2 mummies, a male and a female, that have been at the British Museum for over 100 years, but you cannot see the tattoos on their bodies with the naked eye. Only with infrared photography were researchers able to see these tattoos after being on display basically in the museum for over 100 years. But what's fascinating about these tattoos is that they're the oldest figurative tattoos. Let's see, the Iceman's are just simple geometric markings across his body, most likely for medicinal purposes. But these are actually figural. The woman has a staff on one of her shoulders, which we're not exactly sure of the symbolism, but we think that it might have been an emblem of power relating to her status. And the man has tattoos of a bull on one shoulder and Barbary sheep on the other. And we believe that those might be symbols of virility or masculinity.